We start Carl Jung today. In this series of our discussions, we have completed Freud, Melanie Klein, Wilfred Bion, and now we will be starting with Carl Jung. Probably we'll go on for a month, every Monday, same time. Carl Jung will require 3 to 4 sessions. We start today with the spirit of Jung, and later we'll go on to the concepts of Jung, starting with his model of the mind, then dream analysis, then typology, and then therapy. So today we start with the spirit of Jung because it is radically different from the conventional line in psychoanalysis. The conventional line in psychoanalysis is from Freud to Klein to Wilfred Bion. They are like quintessential, dyed-in-the-wool psychoanalysts. In philosophical terms, they are all materialists. By and large, they are pessimistic about human nature. And they don't look very charitably on the positive aspects of human existence or spirituality. Jung is radically different from them. And therefore, the first difference that we see between the classical line of psychoanalysis and Carl Jung is the spirit. The spirit is very different. The spirit of Jung is given in this statement, the unus mundus. It's a Latin thing, and what it means is unus is one and mundus is world, one world. This statement came up when Jung was working with Wolfgang Pauli. We know Wolfgang Pauli, who was a central figure in quantum mechanics. We talked about Pauli's constant. So he got interested in psychoanalysis, just as Bion analyzed one of the very important quantum mechanics figures. Jung also analyzed one, Wolfgang Pauli. And together, they wanted to find if there is a common fundamental entity of which both material and mind are expressions. And this is the first point where Jung differs from Freud. For Freud, mind was an outcome out of the soma. The phenomena, the psychic phenomena, was coming out of on a material basis. The psychology was rooted in biology. And it was for him just a question of time before psychology could be interpreted in biological terms. And this was his dream, what he used to call the project, which remained unfulfilled because he could not find in his lifetime a biological basis for psychoanalysis. But he was very clear, okay, there is matter, there is life, and there is mind, each emerging out of the more fundamental entity. So when Freud talks about death instinct, he is very clear that matter is the base, and from there life arises, and from there mind arises, and the mind is constantly under the influence of two opposing forces, one that takes it ahead, and second which wants to regress it back to the state of matter. So he makes his philosophy very clear when he talks about death instinct. But Jung that way is very different. Jung's statement is that the psyche is a fundamental fact of nature, which cannot be reduced to anything other than itself. Meaning, you can't reduce psyche to any biological process or any biological process to any physical process. So he was looking at a kind of a multi-elemental philosophy where matter, life, and mind both are equally fundamental. And this hierarchical view that life comes out of matter and mind comes out of life, and the mind therefore can be reduced to life, and life can be reduced to matter. That was not his opinion. So the first difference that we find is here that he thought of psyche as a fundamental fact of nature which cannot be reduced to anything other than itself. So let us get into more of it. Another statement just to lay out the landscape. Jung asks himself a question and he answers again himself. It's a self-rhetoric question. He says, is my life a problem to be solved? And he answers, my intellect can envision that possibility, but the whole of my being says no to it. So he does not look at psyche as a problem-solving area. So he does not approach the psyche strictly from a clinical psychology standpoint, but his canvas is much wider, which leads to both admirers and critics. So let us go in more into him. Some autobiographical details. 1875 he was born, and his childhood was not particularly very happy one. And this, as I said, is almost an eligibility condition to become a good psychoanalyst. That you cannot have a happy childhood. His father was a clergyman, mother was a housewife, but the father was something like a hypochondriac without much confidence in what he was doing, who could not defend his beliefs in front of those who were very good with words and arguments. And as Jung grew into adulthood, his father asked him to develop that faith that he had, which Jung would not have. So his father used to tell him, at some point one has to stop questions and start believing. At some point one should have faith, and Jung used to tell him, give me that faith, because I can't develop it in myself. But his father was not a strong, resourceful, competent person whom Jung could internalize and activate his own masculinity, which he later did with Freud. Because Freud, when he came into his life, he came almost like an ideal father, strong, competent, resourceful, courageous, whom Jung could internalize and activate his own latent masculinity. Mother came from a family which was into mysticism. And Jung remarked that often his mother would be seen as a very normal mother, indulge in practical everyday activities, and suddenly she would go into some sort of a missing states where she was physically there but psychologically not there. And later Jung designated those two personalities as personality number 1 and number 2, which he said were in everyone. That everyone puts up a face, a front to adjust to the world, to adapt to the world. And behind, there is a different personality, which is more in tune with nature, tradition, mythology, magic, and spirituality. And that inner authentic self and the outer personality have a gulf between them, or may have a linkage between them. And if the outer becomes too strong and the inner becomes too weak, it creates a psychological crisis. And Jung designates this connection between personality number 1 and 2 by his concept called the ego-self axis, which we'll come to when we do Jung's model of the mind. So Jung studied medicine at the University of Basel, 1900, and he chose psychiatry. At that time, it was not fashionable, and Jung was getting much better options. And at his time, those who could not get any other option went into areas like psychiatry. So there were desirable areas and there were default areas. And psychiatry was in one of those default areas. So Jung had the option open, but he went into psychiatry and everyone criticized him. And Jung says the old ache began again. And the old ache was of being awkward, lonely, strange, and doing something that no one else was doing. This was from his childhood, what he called the old ache. And the old ache started aching again. Again, he found himself alone against the opinion of others. In terms of his attachments, he was insecurely bonded to his mother and ambivalently attached to his father. Very different from Freud, who was very strongly attached in an Oedipal sense with the mother. In 1900, he started working with Bloor. And Bloor was the one who coined the term schizophrenia. And Jung participated in some of the early research with Bloor. His first breakthrough came when he did the word association tests. Many of us know what is called Dalton word association test. It's very simple. You say a word and ask the person to say what free association comes in his mind in terms of words. So you say one word and the subject says 2 or 3 words. And 2 things come up. One, that free association is in work in the mind. And when you say a word and the person says a word, there's some connection between them. For example, I say the lion and the patient says the father. So it tells us about how he views the father as somebody very dominating, very violent, very aggressive, or maybe as somebody strong, as somebody kingly, somebody royal. But some story comes. When you give one word for another word, the word that you give carries a story. Similarly, when there is something traumatic stirred up inside, you take more time to respond. Like, I say sun and you say light, I say moon and you say night, and now I say father and you stop. You take more time to respond. There is some resistance inside. So those tests were very important, and they were like, for the first time, empirically we were in an indirect way proving the existence of the unconscious. And when his results were sent to Freud, Freud became very happy, because it was like somebody proving empirically what he was saying in terms of his theorization. Jung's interest in occult was from a very young age. His doctoral dissertation was on the psychology and pathology of so-called occult phenomena. And in this, he analyzed a young medium, a young psychic medium. And he realized how real the psychotic experiences were to this young medium. That what we called as psychosis, for this medium, it was just occult or just a subjective experience. There's nothing awkward or clinical about it or pathological about it. Around 1900, 1902, Jung started reading Freud's writings, particularly interpretation of dreams. And in 1907, after 5 years, they met. And when they met, the conversation went on for a very long time. It was 13 hours. They had their lunch and dinner in between, but the whole day they kept talking. And they were in a state what Bowlby calls the participation mystique. We have discussed this before, that when 2 people get so lost into each other, they forget the rest of the world. It's just you and me and no one else. And that state Bowlby describes as participation mystique. This state we often find in 2 people sitting in a park, or 2 experts intensely deep into their subject, or in a training program when the trainer comes to one particular person who has asked a question and they get lost in the discussion, and rest of the surrounding almost does not exist for them. So they were almost in that state of participation mystique. What were the unconscious motivations that each sought the other? And when we do Jung, everyone has to spend some time on Jung and Freud, because Jung's own evolution and the evolution of his ideas is often compared and contrasted too with Freud. So Freud wanted Jung because he wanted an obedient son. He wanted somebody who was Christian, who was not a Jew, who was brilliant and who belonged to the elite of the society, so that after him, that person can take the leadership of the psychoanalytic movement. Jung wanted Freud because he wanted a strong, competent, resourceful, courageous father that his father was not, whom he could internalize and activate his masculinity. And the two got along very well. Freud used to call Jung my crown prince. And because of Freud, Jung became the first president of the International Psychoanalytic Association. When it was formed, Jung became the first president of it. Slowly, differences started arising. Initially, Jung suppressed his reservations. He thought Freud was far more intelligent, far more knowledgeable, experienced, and he was just beginning, so he kept it to himself. One important event which happened between them was when they were on a voyage to the United States, because Freud had almost a phobic aversion to travel by sea to the United States. So when they were there, after many cancellations, because twice the Psychoanalytic Congress in USA was postponed because Freud could not come. He was the founder and he was everything in that movement at that time. So when they were on a voyage, in the morning, both of them shared dreams with each other. So Jung shared a dream and Freud gave an interpretation. Then Freud shared a dream and Jung asked for free associations and Freud refused. He said, I cannot risk my authority. And Jung says, this burned into my memory, this statement, I can't risk my authority, because it means he was valuing authority above truth. So this was one major event. The second major event was, once in a conference, Freud had this hysterical fit and he fell down. And as he had the hysterical fit and he fell down, and Jung went to help him. And Freud said a statement which Jung could not forget. He said, how sweet it will be to die. And that created a stir in Jung's mind that after all that he has done has not helped him. He is still agonized in his condition. All his conceptual inventions have not helped him be in peace. So this was second important element, and many others, but two to note between the two. Yeah, you're saying something.
No, sir, I did not. I lifted and kept the bell away. I asked for a cup of coffee, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Please. Freud wanted Jung to be scientific as far as possible and not go into mythology, synchronicity, or anything transpersonal or mystical. And when Jung expressed those ideas, Freud used the statement, he would say, don't go so far when you are so near. But Jung's publication of Psychology of the Unconscious 1912, that started a complete break. Because in this, he expressed two ideas which were completely original and apart from Freud. The first idea was that the unconscious is not strictly personal, but there are transpersonal elements. Transpersonal meaning something that goes beyond the personal experience of the person. Freud's unconscious was created where the unconscious machinery, which was innate, interacted with the environment, and it was strictly the personal experiences of the person which were constituting his unconscious. So Freud's idea of the unconscious was completely personal. There was no transpersonal element in it, but Jung's idea was different. He had a transpersonal idea of the unconscious because collective unconscious is a transpersonal idea. You have contents in your unconscious which have not come out of your experience. They are there by birth, by nature. So the first was the idea of the unconscious became transpersonal. So the idea of the unconscious shifted from Freud's idea of unconscious, which was strictly personal, to Jung's idea of unconscious, which was transpersonal. Transpersonal meaning all the contents there were not arising because of experience of the person. They were above and beyond the experiences of the person. That was one. Second idea that Jung had, which was very different from Freud, was the conception of life energy. Because Freud's idea of the psyche was very hydraulic. We have discussed before the hydraulic roots of pathology and the non-hydraulic roots of pathology. And Freud's idea was that the life energy is in reality libidinal. It is the sexual energy at its core. And that erotic energy, when it is repressed, it leads to pathology. What is the drive model of pathology? That there is a drive, and the drive cannot be satisfied in reality because of reality and morality, and you suppress it, and that repression leads to pathology. It's a hydraulic idea of pathology. When we did Melanie Klein, we saw non-hydraulic areas of pathology. For example, in Melanie Klein, we saw internalization of a good, reliable, stable object. That was central to psychological health. And that is not a hydraulic entity at all. In Wilfred Bion, we saw finding the right container in early part of the life. That was necessary for health. That also is a non-hydraulic idea. But we are in much earlier days of psychoanalysis where it was primarily, at least for Jung and Freud, it was hydraulic. Although Jung slowly went into a non-hydraulic idea of pathology. So for Jung, the erotic energy, the energy in the system was not strictly erotic, but it was something which was more generic that he called life energy. And the life energy, when it is at the service of the erotic function, it becomes erotic. But it's not always erotic. So Freud's idea was the root is erotic energy, and through a process of sublimation, it converts into different types of energies at work for different purposes. So the root was erotic, and then sublimation makes it something different. For Jung, it was more like a colorless liquid, and whatever drop you put in, it becomes of that color. So the primary idea about energy was different. Freud thought it was erotic, Jung thought it was neutral life energy, and at service of different functions, it acquired different flavors. This created a strain in the relationship between the two, and it is there in the correspondence. We will see a movie if we get time, The Dangerous Method, in which the whole autobiographical thing is given. It's almost an autobiographical movie because the dialogues that you see there are actually the ones which they wrote to each other in their letters. Finally, Jung broke free, and Jung says, it is dangerous for the egg to be cleverer than the hen, but what is in the egg must find courage to creep out. So this was his stance when he was separating. So once he separated from Freud, he resigned from International Psychoanalytic Association, and that was like a final break. And both of them went into different ways. Freud continued to develop psychoanalysis as he saw it, and the late Freud went into death instinct. So we saw how early Freud and late Freud were very different. The early Freud was dedicated to libido, to sexuality, to erotica, and the later Freud was dedicated unknowingly to aggression, to death instinct, to destruction, to masochism. So Freud went on developing that part. Jung developed his own school, what we call today the analytical psychology. And it came out very different. What is important is what this break did to both of them. Because this break was in a way traumatic to both of them. Because both were psychologically enmeshed with each other. And this led to Freud that after Jung, he really got that close to very few people. It's like after repeated disappointments, you stop attaching to people. It becomes more and more difficult to create new attachments as you age. Because as you age, the disappointments also pile up. And after some repetition of disappointments, resignation comes. You say, I am done. And then it's after, once you say, I am done, it's very difficult to develop new attachments. So Freud underwent that. Jung underwent a very different process. He calls it nakia. It is the process of psychological turmoil, which was, some people call it psychosis, some people call it self-transformation, some people call it inner journey. But from a very conservative standpoint, it was a psychotic process. And the good part was that Jung was experiencing it firsthand. Some people even call it the transformative crisis. So there's a lot of discussion in the Jungian circles on what do you call this crisis? Do you call it a psychotic crisis? Do you call it a self-exploratory crisis? Or do you call it a transformative crisis? We'll leave it at that. But this nakia was very important for Jung. Two things happened. One was his old ache that he always keeps talking about across his life of being lonely, awkward, brilliant, but completely on one's own, apart from the mainstream. That started aching again. Jung uses a very good phrase for it. He says, to live in a compensatory relationship with the age. That the times in which you are living, that is going this way and you go this way. In a way, you bring balance. It's a compensatory way of living with the times. And that's very difficult because you are on the lonely path. So that started for Jung, and he underwent a very difficult turmoil period. In that period, he noted his own material, his own responses to that material in what is called the Red Book. And he kept writing those things in the collection called the Red Book, 1914 to 1930. And that is still available for anyone who is interested to see how one of the best thinkers looks at his own near psychotic or psychotic experiences. And it started with a dream that Jung had, where he saw a flood of blood which was pouring down and drowning whole of Europe. And that was just before the First World War. And Jung felt it was a event of synchronicity, where in a way, unknowingly, he foresaw what was to come. So we see here Jung's interest in synchronicity in something mystical. And this dream, as great significance, because this dream is to Jung was what Nietzsche's horse was to Nietzsche. When we talked about Nietzsche's horse, we talked about how Nietzsche saw a horse being whipped, which fell down on the ground, and Nietzsche took him in his arms and said, "I know how you feel." And with that, his psychotic journey began, and he never recovered till he died. Jung had a different journey. He recovered very soon. So Jung's dream of the flood of blood was not exactly like Nietzsche's horse, but both were seminal in some way. So he had a near psychotic breakdown when his wife called one of his ex-mistresses and ex-patient, Sabrina Spielrein, to help him out. And this is a very strange thing, because Sabrina Spielrein had come as a psychotic patient to Jung, and now Jung was psychotic, and the ex-patient who had healed is now coming to help him. So that's one of the part of Jungian folklore. The red books were what Jung wrote down along with illustrations, in which he wrote down the dreams and visions, dialogues with the symbolic figure. And one of the important symbolic figure was Philemon, the archetypal manifestation of the old wise man. And we'll come to it when we do what is an archetype and how it operates in the psyche and how it operates in pathology, when we do model of the mind of Jung. So Jung had the red book, which is a collection of his first-hand raw data, dreams and visions, dialogues with symbolic figures. This is like a self-talk he would have with figures emerging from inside. His reflections on his own psychological crisis and foundation of many ideas. Freud had a similar journey. What Jung calls nekia, Freud calls the splendid isolation. So Freud had this 7 years of splendid isolation where he went into himself, analyzed his own dreams, found out his own Oedipus complex, and emerged out of it far more healthy than before, although he had pathology all his life, but was much healthier and productive after he came out of it. So Jung's nekia in a way parallels his phase of the splendid isolation. Apart from the red book, Jung had noted down in raw form his material, because he was a writer. He used to like to note down things in the black book. And one can say part of the black book has got converted to some extent into red book. But the black books have also come out recently. I think 2009 or 10, somebody published it. So the black books are even more raw than the red book. But these are invaluable sources of material, which is first-hand material on Jung himself, because Freud never gave us first-hand material on himself. He kept it very confidential in that way. Something on the break. This is a part of psychoanalytic folklore. How did the break happen, and why did it happen? What effect it had on both of them? The reasons are here. Someday the break had to happen, because by today's standards, we can say both of them were narcissists in their different ways. And both of them could not accept anyone else as a leader but themselves. Apart from that, there were intellectual differences which were real. And the unconscious part of both of them was very different. Freud as a person was a strange mixture of narcissism, brilliance, being an autocrat, and being a masochist. And he had this serial falling out with everyone in his life. So he fell out with Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, Ferenczi, Otto,
Young.
yeah, I forget the full name. I remember Otto, I forget the full name. But there is a series of people that Freud fell out with. And he remarks to one of his friends that my unconscious demands that I find the most loved friend and the hated enemy in the same person. So it was a part of his ambivalence. Freud wanted an obedient son, which Jung initially was ready to become, but later he did not want to become. So that was one thing. When Jung started emerging on his own, he could not take it. Second, Freud had a habit of always focusing on the origins of pathology. And Jung had a habit of focusing on the goals of pathology. So in philosophical terms, Freud was driven ontologically, but Jung was driven teleologically. The minds were functioning differently. One was habituated to look backwards and see where the origins are. And second was habituated to look forwards to see what the goals were. And that comes out in therapy also. Freudian therapy is very much concerned with origins. And Jungian therapy is very much concerned with goals. Freud wanted psychoanalysis to be saved, and he was anxious that if we go on to something like mythology or synchronicity or mysticism, psychoanalysis will be attacked by its detractors as a pseudoscience, and will go back to the department of philosophy from where psychology has emerged in just last 200 years. Jung was not so insistent on saving psychoanalysis. He wanted to travel with psychoanalysis in various areas. So he wanted to take it to mythology, to mysticism, to anthropology. Freud wanted to create at last a science which is based in biology. And Jung was more interested in his individuation. So the differences were very clear. Okay, someday it had to happen, and it happened. What else can we say about the two people? Freud, in a way, had a much better superego, far more self-control. He would not sleep along with his patients. Jung was a serial offender when it came to sleeping with the patients. He slept with many of his patients. Two of them we all know, Sabrina Spielrein and Tony Wolff. And we know because his wife also knew it, and twice he came near to divorce because of his affairs. Freud had this habit of being very patient, discover a concept and take it deep and keep working on the concept. Jung was more like an explorer. I call him a man on a motorcycle, where you discover one concept, write something about it, then we move to the next concept and do it. Jung was more of an idealist, Freud was more of a materialist. Jung always wanted this grand theory of everything, which he worked with Wolfgang Pauli to find if there is some fundamental entity from which everything else emerged, including matter and psyche. That's where we gave the first statement of Jung, that the psyche is a fundamental fact of nature, which cannot be reduced to anything other than itself. It's complete variation from Freud's idea of emergence of life from mind and mind from life. Sorry, life from matter and mind from life. So Jung was not comfortable in philosophical terms with nothing but atoms and the void, which is one of the planks of materialism. In an unsaid way, although he did not philosophize it consciously, philosophically where it belongs is actually into the area what is called the conscious holism. These are some of the works of Jung. Where is his influence? The influence is spread across psychotherapy, literature, religious studies, very deep in mythology. Some people in art, film analysis. Many people use these ideas for personal development. Like Freud, Jung's ideas have been taken in many of these areas, often without credit. That is true for both of them. So if we want to distinguish two schools of psychoanalysis, how do we do it? We can do it on this 7 criteria. So whether we want to distinguish Freud from Jung, Jung from Klein, Freud from Bion, any two schools, if you want to differentiate, one way to do it is to look at schools in this 7 criteria. First is, what is the philosophy? Second, model of the mind. Third, core concepts of the school. Four, pathogenesis. How does the school explain occurrence of any pathology? Take an example. If we say delusion of persecution, Freud will explain delusion of persecution in causal terms by referring to repressed homosexuality. His dynamic will be, I love you, not accepted to superego. You use reaction formation defense, convert it into I hate you. So I love you becomes I hate you. I hate you becomes I kill you. Again, not acceptable to morality, use of projection, project it out. So I kill you becomes you kill me, and therefore the paranoia. So Freud's idea will be that a homosexual desire arises in a man or a woman towards person of the same gender. So the first unconscious movement is I love you, converted by reaction formation into I hate you. The cycle goes on. I hate you becomes I kill you. Again, not acceptable to morality. Use of defense of projection. Project it out. Now he will kill me. And the role of healing method will be acceptance of homosexuality. That will be a Freudian way of looking at this. The same thing if we go to Klein, she will give a different causal explanation for delusion of persecution. She will say, the split is open and the bad breast, which was attacked by the man's aggression in early childhood in fantasy, is thrown out in terms of pieces, and now the fear is the attack of the bad breast will come. The aggression and the sadism with which I attack the bad breast brutally, now I will be attacked with even more ferocity, more brutality, more sadism by the bad breast. So the same phenomena, delusion of persecution, two schools giving two different causal explanations. And if the pathogenesis is different, obviously the healing method will be different, because healing method always will be a function of pathogenesis. If you believe that repressed homosexuality is leading to paranoia, you will go into self-acceptance. If you believe that the split open is leading to paranoia, you will focus therapy on closing the split. So the healing approach in therapy always will reflect pathogenesis. Jung will probably say that it's overactivation of the predator archetype, which is projected out, and therefore you feel that paranoia. We'll come to it when we do the archetypes. But the fourth important element is pathogenesis. How does the school, any school for that matter, use its core concepts to explain the cause of pathology? Then, what are the psychological tests and tools that can be used using the concepts? For example, if you use Freudian theory, you will develop psychological tests and tools which will be based upon Freudian concepts. Say, for example, even if you take Rorschach, if you take Rorschach test, and if you ask any person to give free associations by showing him those plates, how you interpret those free associations completely depend upon the school that you are following. You give Rorschach responses to a person from a Freudian school, you will come up with different conclusions than somebody from Kleinian school or the Jungian school. And of course, there will be areas of overlap and agreement and areas of disagreement. So the psychological tests and tools of that school, that is the fifth point by which the schools can be differentiated. Sixth will be the healing method. Like Jung's way of doing therapy is very different from Freud's way of doing therapy. Freud, Bion, and Klein, they all are into the classical psychoanalytic frame of on-the-couch therapy, 3 to 5 days a week. Anything less than 3 days is no psychoanalysis at all. And the person is a blank screen. The anonymity of the therapist is primary. And the frame of the therapy has to be strictly followed. In Jung, we find a different approach. Therapy becomes face-to-face. Instead of 3 to 5 days, it becomes 2 days a week, at times even 1 day a week. And the therapist does far more self-revelation than a classical Freudian, Kleinian, or Bionian therapist would do. The idea of the blank screen is not central. Invitation of projection is not central. Projective identification is not central. For Freud, invitation to transference was central. Freud placed great emphasis on transference. So invitation to transference was central in the therapy room, and that calls for anonymity and strict imposition of the frame. I said before, when we were doing technique, how human can you be in the therapy room depends upon how pure a transference you want. And how pure a transference you want depends upon how much can you make use of that pure transference and how much can the patient bear it. Because one of the situations is, if you impose the frame very quintessentially and you impose anonymity of the therapist also very strictly, and the projection of omnipotence comes, and that in turn leads to unbearable envy, the patient will stop coming just because of the imposition of the frame. And the frame, instead of holding the patient, will lead him into an unbearable effect. So as we said before, it has to be calibrated. The frame and the anonymity both have to be calibrated. But in the Jungian framework, we find it's very liberal. It's not that strict an imposition of frame and anonymity. Like one of the patients came and Jung said, "So you are in a soup too," which means you are in a soup and I am also in a soup. That kind of self-revelation, no Freudian, Kleinian, or Bionian would ever dream of doing. It's like a sacrilege. It's a taboo that is broken. The goal of therapy. The goal of therapy also is very different. Freud goes at length on this in his paper called Therapy Terminable or Interminable, where he discusses at great length when can we terminate the therapy, when is it enough? Because the unconscious can never be fully known, it can never be fully transformed. No person can be free from it completely. So at what point we say it's enough and we terminate therapy? Some people will not go that far. They will say removal of symptoms is more than enough of a attainment to stop therapy. But as we saw in psychoanalysis, there are two parts why people come. Majority of people come because they want removal of symptom. But some people come out of a Socratic motivation to know oneself and to enhance one's quality of life. And that is where we said before, psychoanalytic psychotherapy and pure psychoanalysis become different. In psychoanalytic psychotherapy, the goal is removal of symptoms. But in Puritan form of psychoanalysis, removal of symptoms is secondary. It happens on the way. But the core is to know oneself from many different perspectives. It is more of analysis and less of symptom removal. But the clients that we get, hardly anybody comes to the Socratic motivation today and says, I want to know myself. So what we do by and large is not pure psychoanalysis, but psychoanalytic psychotherapy. The goal of therapy here is individuation, which is variously interpreted as becoming the best possibility of oneself, best possible of becoming the best version of oneself, becoming a rounded whole, integrating the unconscious so far as possible, finding out what one really is. Differently, you can define that. Jung uses the word individuation. So for him, symptom removal is not really the goal. Goal is more than symptom removal. It is more of individuation. So in that way, the spirit of Jung is more like the pure psychoanalysis, where symptom removal is on the way, necessary but not sufficient. But the core focus is on individuation. Becoming what one has to become in a latent way. Like the seed has to become the tree. Similarly, we have the seed inside and we have to allow it to become the tree that is ourselves, which is very different from the way Freudian, Kleinian or Bionian would look at the goal of therapy. So when we look at Jungian approach on these points, it's very different from classical psychoanalysis of Freud, Bion and Klein. First, any question till now?
Questions?
Because we are changing gears from classical psychoanalysis to Jung, which is very different. Anyone else?
We'll WhatsApp to you later when we think of any doubts or questions.
Fine enough. So let's look at one by one what are the differences between Jung and others. In terms of philosophy, the classical approach is of materialism. The idea is of emergence. In Jung, it is more of conscious holism. In terms of model of the mind, we'll go into it just now. The Freudian model of the mind is very different from Jungian. And the core difference is the unconscious in Freud, Klein and Bion is strictly personal. Whereas in Jung, it is transpersonal. It has contents which come beyond the experience of the person. In terms of concepts, we will go into Jungian concepts. But what is important is the dream analysis method is completely different. The same dream, if you give to a Freudian, he will come out with a different interpretation. A Kleinian, different interpretation. Bionian different and Jung different. Because Jung's method is different. So if time permits, we will do one dream which will interpret from different schools. The same dream you interpret from Freudian angle, Kleinian, Bionian, Jungian, and then try to consolidate into one analysis. Psychological tests and tools, we may not have the time to go into it. Healing and the goal of therapy, we have talked about. So let us go into the first conceptual area. Till now, we have just been kind of into the folklore and gossip of Jung. Now let us go into the concepts. If you look into model of the mind, different people have given different models of the mind. This is Freudian model of the mind, which we have done. This is Jung's model of the mind, which we'll do today. This is the Eastern Indian model of the mind from yoga psychology. When we do the Eastern models, we'll take it up. So this is just as in the West, you have many models of the mind. In the East also, you have many models of the mind. This is one. the classical yoga psychology model. Then you have the Tantra model of the mind. There are some people who are from a cognitive side. They use what is called the information processing model of the mind, which is a very cognitive science approach to the mind. And then you have Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, which is one of the most comprehensive in the Eastern area. And it integrates the tantric model of the mind with Sri Aurobindo's own concepts. And then a heat model of the mind that I have developed, which is taking Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, Freud, Jung, and adding something of my own. This is how it comes about, the heat model of the mind. So let us go back to today's subject, Jung's model of the mind. Anyone who has questioned till now on Freud's model or anything?
Yeah, just the last one, this one. Superego, ego, id, unconscious, preconscious, conscious. Superego and ego are pervading all three areas of the mind.
Correct. They will have action.
Whereas,
They will have action in all the three.
whereas id is largely purely unconscious.
Correct.
And conscious is,
What
it has,
we are aware of at this moment. For example, what is aware at this moment is we are sitting in a discussion on Carl Jung. We are all in front of a computer. This is our conscious at this moment. But if I ask you, which shirt did you wear yesterday? Now, because I ask you, suddenly it becomes conscious. So that is pre-conscious, which is inactive part of the conscious, but can become conscious on demand. So pre-conscious is a inactive part of the conscious because the processing power of the mind is limited. So at any given point of time, we have to focus on one thing and make everything else inactive. So activation and deactivation are very core functions of the human brain or the human mind. So what is conscious but inactive is pre-conscious, which can be made active on demand. But the unconscious is outside of our awareness and control. It cannot be made active on demand because there is this repression barrier between the pre-conscious and the unconscious. And even if we can't will our unconscious to be active, just like in the biological sense, we have an autonomous system and we have a volitional system. Like my heartbeat or my lungs, I can't command my heartbeat to take a particular value or my liver to secrete some things that I want it to secrete. So those things are under the control of autonomous system, and the parallel to it is the unconscious in the psychic area. But you see, the action of ego and superego are all the three. So many things will be in the unconscious, will be such that either the ego or the superego, they repress it in the unconscious after its generation and they never come. So Klein uses two words for it. Fantasy, F-A-N-T-A-S-Y, and fantasy, P-H-A-N-T-A-S-Y. So the F wala fantasy is that material which comes up in dreams or day fantasies. But the PH fantasy material is such that it is so repressed, it cannot come up even in dreams. And it's only in very long therapy that certain material comes up. In Bionian terms, that material will be what Bion calls the beta material, the beta elements, on which the alpha function has not yet worked and therefore is not available for thinking or for fantasy. It is so raw, so unprocessed. It is still not reached a stage of processing where it can be used for thinking or for fantasy. So it is a material which is awaiting to become a fantasy, awaiting to become a